There we go. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is Leticia Ami from the GIIN. I have the pleasure today to be joined by Claudia Simler from CDC Group. And I also have several colleagues from the Iris Plus team on the line. Adam Dolan, Lisa Glasgow, and Kellen are all with us. It's great to see so many of you on the line, many familiar faces that we've engaged through the last year and a half or two while we were developing Iris Plus, and also a few new faces. So very grateful to have you all on the line. The plan for today is to have a discussion with Claudia from CDC about tools and methods to rapidly and effectively collect data that delivers impact insights while also delivers valuable business intelligence. So Claudia will walk us through specific tools and methods that CDC has found to be practical, and we'll review pros and cons, as well as how Iris Plus can support each of this. And then we're going to open up for Q&A with you all. So a few just housekeeping notes before we kick it off. We are keeping everybody on mute just to preserve the quality of the sound. But we will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. But what we would love for you to do is, if you have any questions as we are going, please use the chat box and start putting your questions there. And then when we open to Q&A, we'll start reading the questions from the top. So please do that. But let's try to keep lines muted for now, just for sound quality. So with that, I'm going to just start. And so we will start also with just a quick overview of Iris Plus, just to bring everybody up to the same page, since I know that some of you have been very involved in the development of Iris Plus, but some of you have not. And so we just want to make sure everybody is on the same page. And then we'll move to data collection tools and how to use them with Iris Plus, and then we'll open to Q&A. So on that note, as many of you know, we launched Iris Plus in May of last year. And Iris Plus is quite an evolution from the Iris you used to know, which was a catalog of metrics. And Iris Plus today is a system to help investors measure, manage, and optimize impact. So what it does is that it helps translate your impact goals into results. And it does so by providing a pathway that helps you frame your impact goals around common goals, which could be either the SDGs or around common and generally accepted impact themes, such as financial inclusion or clean energy access or education. It also gives you the evidence base and research to help you inform your theory of change and anticipate expected impact, for example. It gives you as well core metric sets. These are sets of key metrics that you need to understand progress towards your goals. And it also has practical guidance and resources to help improve your IMM practice. And this is the focus of what we are going to be talking about today. Of course, Iris Plus continues to be the home of the Iris catalog of metrics, which is aligned today to over 50 different frameworks, tools, standards, and metric sets, including the SDGs, the 5 dimensions of impact, HIPSO, the 2X challenge, and many more. And it's a public good managed by the GIIN. I just want to stop here for a second and share a little bit about how much Iris Plus is being used all around the world since we launched it, because this is something that people have been asking me a lot. And so I thought many of you might have this question. So just to share with you, since we launched in May of last year, we've received over 50,000 visits to the site, and there's been over 6,600 accounts created. And in total, we have about 18,000 or more subscribers also to Iris Plus. This means people that just sign up to receive notifications and emails and news from us. And our users are all around the world, but with higher concentration around Europe and the Americas. How are stakeholders using Iris Plus is another question I get a lot. So I thought I would share a couple quotes with you all that we've heard. So we've heard, for example, an investor say that Iris Plus was very helpful, specifically around when they were completing a request for proposal from an asset owner, and a lot of the responses that they needed they could find from Navigating Impact and Iris Plus. since it was all embedded and also aligned with the 5 dimensions that this request for proposal was as well. Other investor mentioned that Iris Plus has really helped them shift the focus from outputs to outcomes and guided them on how to do so. And then finally, this is something that we hear a lot, is that really Iris Plus does the homework for you, because it gives you all in one place the evidence base, the research, not just the catalog metrics, but also your core sets of metrics. And it's already aligned to the SDGs and the 5 dimensions, so it saves a lot of time. What we're going to be talking about today is about one particular aspect of Iris Plus, which is guidance. So this is one of the features or elements of Iris Plus, and what we do with this guidance is that we want to provide practical resources to support IMM practice. And we developed guidance on an ongoing basis to cover areas that we identify in the market as being a big need. There are different types of guidance. There's the fundamentals, what we call the fundamentals. These are like what you need to understand, the basis of how Iris Plus works. So for example, the Iris Plus thematic taxonomy describes the different themes in Iris Plus, what's in it, what's not. Iris Plus core metric sets explains what are core metric sets, how they work, and whatnot. We just had a second type that are use cases. This is probably self-explanatory, but it's just, to show examples of how Iris Plus is used, and we're about to publish one with Naveen. And then we have this third category called how-tos. These are very practical, and they're to help show how to use Iris Plus along different aspects of IMM. And this is the focus of what we are going to be talking today. We have the pleasure to be launching with CDC Group a piece on how to use Iris Plus for data collection. And so we're going to be diving into this today. Why data collection? Well, we did a couple of surveys last year to the working group to understand what were some of the main areas of need where they wanted us to work on guidance. And this is one that came up again and again as being a key need. So people said, if we could help provide some guidance on how to actually collect the data and describe different data collection methods, and making sure that we were providing something that was practical. And so for that reason, we partner with CDC Group because they have a lot of experience in this, and actually they just launched their impact measurement handbook as well. But without further ado, let me pass it to Claudia, who will tell us more about the work they've done. I want to make sure, Claudia, you're unmuted. There we go. Claudia?
Yeah, thank you so much, Letitia. So to carry on where you left that statement, Letitia, something that we definitely also come across all the time when we speak to RGPs that manage a wide range of our portfolio companies is that they struggle with figuring out exactly how to operationalize this data collection piece. Now, as we heard, defining the what to measure has now become sort of much more easy and clear with the Iris Plus core metric set. That is a great starting point for looking at the what piece to measure, but then the how piece is still something that we wanted to address. And that's where we created this impact measurement handbook that really is supposed to be a practical resource to guide selection of data collection tool that can inform impact measurement and management practice. Now, we know that the universe of tools is very vast, so we chose to dive into a collection of 8 specific tools that we'll be going over today as well, and then really linking that to case studies, mostly from our own portfolio, to make it practical, to really showcase how did portfolio companies make use of these very different tools to both inform their business case and their operations, but also to ultimately report impact back to their LPs and in this case, CDC Group. We developed this impact measurement handbook in conversation with subject matter experts on the different data collection tools, and also, like I mentioned, our own practical experience using them.
Great. Great. So now with that, we're going to go into reviewing the different data collection tools and methods and linking them to IRIS+.
Yeah, so just to take one quick step back before we dive into the tools, we thought it was good to start with the why and just remind people of, why data collection is important and what it helps us to do as impact investors. So first of all, it helps us to assess impact. So to actually validate or test the hypothesis we have around a certain company's products or services, for instance. So it's really a first step to manage any company's operations or impact for that matter, is to go out and collect some data in the real world. The second objective is really to learn, to capture insights both on the positive and the negative, and sometimes also the unintended impacts. And from that really understand where there are opportunities for value creation and even greater impact above and beyond what a company might be achieving today. Then there's a benchmarking piece, which for us as a DFI is very important. When we look across our portfolio of companies within the same sector addressing the same set of problems, it's important for us to have this data to benchmark and really see what does good look like and where are areas where other companies may still need to improve their operations against peers. And then finally, there is an accountability element. Most of us do need to report back to some entity and shareholder who is holding us accountable to achieving the impact targets that we set. So of course that is a key element as well. But all of those four reasons are really what is driving data collection and why it is so key. One quick note before even starting to go out into the world and collect data and ask portfolio companies to collect data that we really wanted to highlight as well in this publication is to say, do check the existing evidence base. And with that, we really mean that often when it comes to impact management and impact measurement practice, we're not starting from scratch. So across sort of key sectors such as agriculture, health, financial inclusion, but even more bespoke intervention areas, there's really a growing body of evidence that lays out the effectiveness of different programs, different business models, that also points to market gaps and challenges. And that can really be a useful starting point for us as investors to look at what has actually worked in different contexts and regions. Can that inform the way we as investors think about what to test, within a given project, within a given company? Can that help us inform how we as investors think about impact measurement for a company or project? And it's important to note that whatever existing evidence is out there, it of course doesn't mean that we can blindly rely on it and think that just because something has worked in India, it will equally work in Ghana. But that's then for us to say, okay, it's worked in India, let's take that model and see if it works in Ghana. Let's then go out and collect that data to test whether it's working. But at least sort of checking that existing evidence base enables us to build on the knowledge of others, build on what's already been done, and collectively improve as a field. And I do want to make one mention of that. Again, here IRIS Plus has developed quite a large evidence base section that Letitia will briefly speak to now.
Yes, so thank you, Claudia. So exactly for all the reasons you mentioned and the importance of checking the evidence base, but also understanding that many times investors don't have the time or the bandwidth to be going and researching and doing a lot of the looking up on the different evidence that already exists. They said we built in an evidence base in IRIS Plus. This is just a quick screenshot of what it looks like, but the evidence base is specific to the different themes and goals within IRIS Plus. So for example, in this example, if we are working in financial inclusion with a goal specifically around gender equality, what you can see here is the results that Iris Plus gives you when you create a profile. And as you can see on the left-hand side, there are different tabs, and one of them is evidence. And so when you click on that tab, what you see is really what we're trying to show here is what is the evidence that connects the goal, so in this case, increasing gender equality through financial inclusion, with specific outcomes. And so in this case, for example, we choose the outcome of improved financial resilience, and then the system gives you different results of research and both academic and field research that exists to show that connection. And you can see on the right-hand side, the stars there are according to the Nesta standards of evidence. We rank how rigorous that evidence is to prove this connection. And so this is already built in Iris Plus. Claudia, back to you.
Yes, thank you. So one note that we also felt was important to mention is that while we've come a very long way in guidance from the side of Iris Plus in terms of defining metrics, and if you are interested in supporting a company within financial inclusion, what should you be looking at? A lot of that is already provided to you by Iris Plus. But what we do want to say is that sometimes there may be scenarios where a business model is very novel to a market. It may not yet be fully understood, and therefore what a company is trying to achieve might not always be fully captured with what is currently available on Iris Plus. So in that scenario, we do sometimes get investors that say, what do I do then? How should I go about selecting my metrics? What data should I collect? And one of the things we really say is start with a few but core metrics. And this is really a way of saying we all as investors have a journey to make when it comes to improving our practice within impact measurement and management. So rather than getting overwhelmed and thinking you do need to go and collect all 20 metrics that, for instance, have been proposed by Iris Plus, we say, well, start with a few and work your way from there. It's a process. The second piece of advice or the second principle that we really want to highlight is to align it to the UN Sustainable Goals to the extent possible. Again, aggregation where it makes sense is an important thing to be able to do for benchmarking purposes, and also to be able to really look across and have a portfolio view on some core metrics. Then another principle is really to choose metrics that also matter for the company. I'll get back to that later with some concrete examples, but this is really to the extent possible to secure alignment between the act of collecting data, making sure that aligns also to company goals as well as investor goals. And then the final sort of practical principles that we do want to highlight is also to have a pragmatic look at that and say what's available to us, what's feasible to gather given the resources, given the time we have, and also how will these metrics and collecting these metrics, how will that help drive action? Is there a way in which we can make that actionable? So again, all of these principles as such are met by the Iris Plus core metric set, but in case investors still have question marks and don't know how to grapple with the proposed metrics from Iris Plus, we do want to point back to these core principles for metric selection.
Excellent. Thank you, Claudia. So yeah, as Claudia mentioned, all of these are met by the core metric set. So I wanted to just take a moment to explain a little bit more what the core metric sets are for some of those of you who are newer to Iris Plus and might not know. So core metric sets are key standardized metrics that are aligned to the SDGs and the 5 dimensions. And they come with guidance, calculation guidance, and also you have the ability to customize your set and download it into an Excel sheet. So this screenshot is just a summary of what it looks like. So again, if we maintain the example we had before, let's say we're working in financial inclusion with the goal to increase gender equality, the core metric set will give you what are the key indicators and metrics for each of the 5 dimensions. So the what, the who, the how much. Actually, I have to say for the contribution and risk, there's no specific indicators, there's guidance. And then we also added the 2 orange ones you see on the bottom, which is how is change happening and additional metrics. These are in different color because they're not part of the 5 dimensions clearly, but the how is change happening is something that we developed to answer to very strong feedback that we were getting from the stakeholders involved in the development of Iris Plus about other things that really don't fall into the 5 dimensions that are maybe more related to details of the product or services or of the operations of the organization that are important to understand and measure, but again, not on the 5 dimensions, as well as some other metrics that are additional. So they might not be part of your core, but they're still important to understand. Let's say, for example, if the organization has any operational certifications or has conducted a social audit or whatnot. These 2 sections you can customize, which means you can add any other metrics to your core metric set, as you see here. But then what's really cool, I think, honestly, about the core metric sets, and this is also the big difference between the Iris catalog of metrics and the core metric sets, is that they come with a lot of guidance. So here's an example. Let's say if I click on the how much change is happening in this case, to understand the scale, the key indicator in this case is the number of female clients reporting an increase in income. And so I want to show you the information that comes with this core metric set. So first, there's this why is this important. There's a little sentence here that helps me understand where the insights that data will help me with. Also on the lower left-hand side, you have the specific Iris metrics that you need to calculate this indicator. And in this case, for example, and we'll get into this in the next few slides, but also showing that some of these may be company data, some of these may be survey data. There might be different sources or different tools that you will use to collect this data. And on the right-hand side, you have the specific steps to calculate this indicator and these metrics. And the reason why we did this is really because we have a very strong focus in Iris Plus to make sure that we help increase data clarity and consistency so that we can compare data over time. And so we don't want to stop with the definition or just the formula of the standard metric, but also we provide a step-by-step calculation guidance of what do you calculate first, if you need to disaggregate by any type of population and whatnot. And then the notes section in many cases has also additional guidance. In this case, for example, it points to a specific data collection tool. In this case, for example, to gather data on client income with such surveys. This is not always the case. We not always have connection to the data, to the tools and methods for data collections, but in some we have. And then you can download this. So your core metric set, you'll see on your screen, you can share it or you download it if you click on the download. If you go to the download tab on the left-hand side and then you click on a little link there and it basically downloads your Excel of your core metric set. And if you customize your core metric set, which means if you added any metrics to it, your download will capture all of those. So this is something that we've heard investors found extremely helpful because they can send it to their investees or potential investees and start the conversation around, what are you measuring? What is feasible for us to measure? And as Claudia mentioned, the core metric sets are these are the key common metrics that stakeholders all around the world have agreed on as being common ones. But we also understand that IMM is a journey and not everybody will be collecting all the core metrics or the core metric set from the get-go. And so, start where you are, see which metrics make the most sense for you, and then over time, work on increasing your alignment to it. And then also as you know, if you've spent some time in the Iris Plus system, we have developed several themes. I'll show at the end today what we have already available on Iris Plus and what's coming. But we do not have coverage today of every single theme or SDG out there in terms of the core metric set. So for those areas where we don't have yet core metric sets developed, a great starting point is the Iris Catalog metrics. You can download it or you can filter it online. And this is already aligned to the SDGs and meets a lot of the principles that Claudia was talking about before. But again, here, maybe thinking about that principle of selecting the ones that matter. Since the catalog metrics will give you probably a lot of metrics, here's where using also those principles is going to be really important in helping you pick what metrics to select. So with that, Claudia, back to you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, so when we want to capture impact, there are many different data tools at our disposal that can help us. And today we'll be briefly covering 8 useful tools that are also covered in our publications in more detail. The 8 tools or methods are company data, diaries, focus groups, in-person surveys, macro data, mobile surveys, satellites, and sensors. And these are really 8 tools that we've selected as very different and complementary data collection tools that can help us understand impact depending on, of course, the questions that we want to understand. Some of the approaches, as you can see, are really about turning to existing data sources and using secondary data already there. Others help us collect primary data to assess change over time and to measure impact. I will now kind of go through these tools briefly one by one, give an overview of their strengths and weaknesses, and then at the very end of the presentation, I'll be concluding with some practical case studies from some of CDC's portfolio companies. So the first one is really company data, and company data is an obvious starting point for impact data collection because it's something that companies are already doing and something they are familiar with. And so being smart about how we as investors can improve the quality of company data to support our portfolio companies and their impact is really the role that we can play here. Now, sort of the strengths of company data, very briefly, is that there's no need necessarily to collect new data, and it's really a good starting point for impact analysis. Now, weaknesses are that, over-relying on this can really risk overestimating positive impact if we don't go beyond what a company reports to us. It certainly doesn't answer the why. So if numbers go up or go down, that's great. We can see trends, but it doesn't tell us anything about the root causes. And that's why also we do want to say it isn't fully comprehensive to understand impact. And so therefore our role as investors here is really to look at the degree of overlap between data that is operationally useful and reported by the company and the type of data that can inform our impact decisions. And in some cases, the two spheres will be heavily overlapping, and in others, less so. So turnover rates of employees are one example of a metric where paying attention to and improving performance in this area often benefits both the bottom line, but it also often means the workforce in question that there is a greater impact there. So it is part of our role as impact investors to find ways to maximize the amount of overlap between those two categories, to also align incentives between what the company needs and what we as investors need.
Great, thank you, Claudia. And so I wanted to point out also to some IRIS metrics that we have that that belong to this category of company data. There's actually quite a lot of IRIS metrics that are company data. We just included here a few, but there's different types. So there are some that are commercial data about the revenue or the sales. There's HR data about turnover rate or employee or promotion of employees. There's financial performance data. And then there's other data points, for example, as operational certifications. And then there's also theme-specific data. So we also have data that is specific to specific themes, such as financial inclusion, education, health, and whatnot. So I would say of all the different data collection tools, this is the one where we have the highest level of connection with IRIS metrics.
And one comment I do want to make, because I do see a quick question coming in specifically on company data validation and to what extent that should be validated. I would say that's, obviously as investors, it's also our responsibility to, for instance, go and visit the portfolio companies on site and engage with the company at a level where you as an investor get that confidence in what is reported back to you. Of course, it can't be done for every single data point all the time, but having a strong relationship with your portfolio companies and making sure you're also closely enough involved in their day-to-day operations to judge whether what's reported back to you is accurate and valid is of course needed.
That's a great point.
And so briefly turning to diaries. Now diaries as a data collection tool are really a method to capture data over longer periods of time, from a few weeks up to several months, either with your respondents directly recording data themselves, or being assisted by enumerators. And so essentially diaries embodies this principle of talking to your customers every day or every week. Now, their strengths is that, they can really be useful for capturing variables with daily or weekly fluctuations, something like income or agricultural output, where people don't always remember it if you ask them a month later or 2 months later, but if you get them to record that every day, it really gives you a good sense of fluctuations in those patterns. And it can also be a great way to capture rich impact stories. So not necessarily representative data, but rather some deep dives and stories around how people experience pain points or positive things in their everyday lives. Now, weaknesses of this data collection method is really that they're quite time-consuming and resource-intensive to plan and execute, and also participant engagement is quite hard, so it does require strong incentive schemes. So while they are really sort of a valuable way to gain business intelligence and capture these impact stories, we also as CDC realize that for most smaller companies, or for most companies in general, they might be too resource intensive to set up and run over longer periods. And so we as investors do need to be mindful of that. But it's a space where we feel that impact investors can think creatively and partner or otherwise support efforts that seek to map out specific areas of interest. And I do want to highlight the Kenya Financial Diaries project as one example. And that was really set up to support the development of financial markets in Kenya for lower income households. And that was funded by FSD Kenya and a Gateway Financial Innovation project, in turn funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this is really a data collection tool that may not necessarily be relevant at the individual company or investor level always, but we did want to highlight it as a way to capture impact in a different way and over longer periods of time.
And so here to mention also on the connection with Iris Plus, of course, even though we're not, Iris Plus doesn't go into the detail that a diary would be able to go. One thing that for us was very, very important as we transitioned from Iris, as you used to know it, to Iris Plus, was to make sure that we were incorporating the stakeholder perspective. And so every single core metric set has 2 specific metrics that look at both the importance of the outcoming person in question to the stakeholder, as well as what are the different stakeholder engagement mechanisms that are being used to gather input from the stakeholder, all in terms of the design, development, and delivery of a product or service. So here's where, for example, that metric, for example, is stakeholder engagement. You could detail that, diaries are one of the mechanisms that are being used to gather input from stakeholders, and then go into more detail and share some of the insights that are being learned from the diaries. Great.
So the next one I think is well known by most people. It's focus groups, and what that is really data that's collected in a group interview format. Sort of has its origins in market research and really came from the realization that many consumer choices are made in a social context. And so the strengths of the focus group is really this ability to stimulate rich discussion among customers or users of a product or service, or in general, talking to people in a social context for teasing out specifically pressing issues, or even sometimes taboo subjects. The weaknesses of focus groups in general are that you can cover a more limited amount of questions, and there is the inherent sort of risk for bias being introduced by group dynamics. But the reason that we did want to highlight focus groups as a great data collection method is really that they're quite accessible as sort of a data collection method, even for small startup companies. And so as investors, we want to see our portfolio companies get out into the field and speak with their customers if they're not already doing it. And so focus groups are really an easy way to get going, get started with data collection of customer or stakeholder perceptions, and can be also more easily engaged with by companies, because you're not looking for representative samples per se, but you're looking for those rich and deep insights that can help you structure thinking around a problem and capture impact. So we wanted to highlight it as a low cost but often high payoff, if you will, data collection method that can yield some valuable insights for both as companies develop their products and services, but also to assess what impact those products and services are having on people.
Super. And so just mentioning, for example, some relevant metrics in this case. So there's different metrics that you could use to collect data from through a focus group. For example, again, the example of importance of outcomes to stakeholders. You could have a focus group to understand, how important or not is the specific outcome to the stakeholders receiving that effect, as well as another example would be client satisfaction ratio. So how likely are clients to recommend the product or service in place to others, for example, is something that you could gather through focus groups or surveys.
Great. So the next one, also quite a known, very well-established method. It's the good old in-person survey that is really about getting out on the ground and speaking to people. Now, surveys are a useful tool for capturing and assessing evidence of any impact that can be more or less accurately self-reported. So that can be improved income from a job, or changes in consumer surplus, increased quality of life, whatever it may be, things where you really are interested in gathering data on how people perceive your products, your services. And so the strengths of in-person surveys are really their ability to capture greater nuance in feedback, and also minimize misunderstandings, because you can engage in that dialogue real time. It also can be a positive thing that you directly observe people in their own environment, and that can really help support insights about impact beyond what people are telling you. And then finally, it overcomes barriers of illiteracy and technology access, especially in those regions of the world where that is still a pressing issue, and where you do need to get out and talk to people to accurately assess the impact. Now, the weakness of the in-person survey is that it does require travel to the site of interest, and sometimes that does mean remote locations, and it's more time-consuming and resource-intensive for those reasons. It's also more difficult to run repeatedly if you are resource-constrained, and again, there is a respondent bias risk. But with that said, there are so many now emerging market providers that specialize in survey design and implementation. So even large-scale surveys today can be turned around quite quickly through large teams of enumerators, and are quite accessible also from a price point perspective, even for smaller investors and smaller companies. So it is a method that, depending on your aims and your questions, is also quite accessible, and a quite good way to engage with the stakeholder group that you're interested in.
Great. So just to point out some example of relevant iris metrics that you would want to collect through in-person survey. One of them, for example, is client income. This metric also represents one of the examples of how in Iris Plus we started to incorporate outcome metrics. And this is something that was important to really help push our understanding of performance and what's happening at the stakeholder level. And so client income, for example, is a metric that asks the stakeholders where their income is increasing, decreasing, or not, based on the products or services in use. And so this is something clearly that would be asked typically on an in-person survey. And then there's a few others also, examples of metrics, but also what surveys can be very helpful is in to help discover some more qualitative insights of data that might be captured at a company level. So for example, at a company level or with company data, you might know if the organization or the enterprise is offering, let's say, non-financial support or after-sale client support. But through surveys, you can get qualitative insights to understand how effective or the type, the number of hours of that support provided, or the training, or how effective that was, and whatnot. Okay, I'm going to just keep us moving in the interest of time because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. So Claudia, back to you.
Yeah, so I'll try to move quickly as well. So mobile surveys is really data that's collected remotely, either via call center, SMS, or IVR, which is interactive voice response. And what is great about mobile surveys is that mobile phones have really proliferated across the entire globe today. And so they are a great way to reach even low-income populations, and often even remote and very rural populations. They're a great way to survey both customers, suppliers, or other stakeholder groups and assess simple questions, things like customer satisfaction. They're also quite lightweight on the respondent because you meet the respondent where they are and you don't take up a lot of their time, which is also an important consideration. The weaknesses of mobile surveys is that, again, especially for rural populations or if there are gaps in technology access, there are certain groups that simply cannot be reached through mobile. And for SMS and IVR, there is no way to probe answers, engage in a dialogue, or clarify misunderstandings. And then finally, for mobile surveys, you of course do need access to phone numbers, which sometimes can be a challenge if the company in question does not have, let's say, a well-maintained database of customer contact details. So that is something to be mindful of. But one thing that we definitely at CDC Group have found is that, especially for smaller businesses, this is a valuable method to gain greater insights into a customer base. For instance, there are so many providers today across the African continent, but also in Asia, that specialize in mobile surveys for small startups to get going very quickly and relatively cheaply. So for us as investors, we find it a great way to also drive a greater appetite, if you will, for impact insights at that company level, because companies themselves can see how quick, how easy it is, and often they get a lot of valuable insights from very few questions, say, and that gets them also more excited about the whole concept of data collection and how you can drive insights into impact quite easily.
Great. And just to keep it brief so we can keep moving, again, there are some examples here of metrics that can be collected through mobile surveys. These are, again, just examples and not exhaustive, but moving to the next one.
Yeah, and I think in the interest of time, I'll go very briefly over macro data as well as satellites and sensors, which are also two other methods. So, I mean, in very briefly, macro data is really aggregated data sets that are often collected in either publicly available or proprietary databases. What's useful is that it can help calibrate models that aim to assess indirect impacts. So it's useful for maybe larger investors that have the budgets or have the resources to actually engage in modeling exercises. It is something that requires at least some level of technical proficiency and skill to adequately use for modeling, and therefore we also as CDC acknowledge that it may be less accessible for the smaller investors. But we do want to point to it as a valuable source, that there's a treasure trove of data across World Bank, ILO, and other databases that can help impact investors that wish to model their impacts at the portfolio level.
Super. And here the link with Iris Plus is not at the metric level, but it's at the evidence-based level. So the evidence base in Iris Plus is streamlined from several macro databases, including the World Bank, IPA, FAO, the World Health Organization, ITAD, and whatnot. And we use also a lot of these macro databases to inform the research that is included with all profiles of Iris Plus, where it shows, what is the size of the problem, who is typically more affected, and whatnot.
Yeah, so satellites and sensors, I'll jump quickly over them as I have a case study coming up. So if we can move maybe to the mobile survey case study. One case study that I did want to highlight, because I think it really shows what mobile surveys can do at the company level. So one of CDC's portfolio companies, SunCulture, is a company that sells affordable solar-powered water pumps and irrigation systems. And we engaged with them and had them engaged in a call-based survey to collect data from customers. And what that helped them do is a few things. So the graphs we see on this slide, the first one really shows the customer income levels. And what it showed, as you can see on the pink trend line, is that most of their customers were actually below the national average. And so that gave them a really good sense of how poor their customers were and what that meant for product pricing. The second graphic that we see on the left-hand side is a net promoter score that showed that 65% of their customers actually were willing to recommend the product to a friend. And the third one was really a benchmarking result, where we could see that the company was overperforming against peers in some areas and also underperforming on other areas. And one of them was delivering value for money, where the survey really showed that competitors were doing better. And so based on the survey, which was relatively quick and easy for the company to turn around, the company really did three things. So the first thing was that the company was able to tweak product design, following their finding through the survey that a vast amount of customers had experienced problems with the product. So that was one concrete value add from this survey. The second one was that they were able to implement new SMS and phone survey scripts that were recommended by the survey provider they engaged with for the survey, for them to help run repeated customer satisfaction surveys over time. And the third takeaway for the company was really that it was able to analyze customer repayment data to understand differences in late versus on-time payments over time. And so this is, for us, a really good example of where a mobile survey was able to drive very concrete business insights at the company level, and at the same time, it was able to tell us as impact investors, as CDC, how this company was actually creating impact, how it was doing against peers, but also who it was reaching, how poor were these customers, what were the characteristics of these people. So again, this is a good example of where we as investors can play the role of thinking creatively, of engaging with our portfolio companies to see what opportunities there are for data collection that really informs their business, helps them make better decisions, helps them inform product design, but also enables us as investors to understand what is really happening on the ground. And this is really the role that we continue to play, and that we see as one of our main contributions as impact investors. The second example, which I quickly want to mention, is an example of sensors that are used within the context of an Indian-based dairy company. Now, when it comes to sensors, it's important to note that this really makes sense where it's already part of the company's operating model, where the technology is embedded in the provision of the product or the service of the company. But what was interesting here is that while this Indian dairy company uses the sensor equipment to monitor milk quality of the milk coming in from farmers to unlock payments, it also enables this company to collect a treasure trove of data that in aggregate enables us as investors to really understand things like cattle productivity, milk quality, revenue, volumes, and farmer loyalty. So a lot of metrics that help the company do their day-to-day business and improve their day-to-day business, but also really tell a rich story about what is happening at the level of the farmers.
Great. Thank you, Claudia, so much for this incredible insights on all these different data collection methods. I know you have, maybe let's do like a few seconds to wrap this, and I want to make sure we turn into Q&A because we've had a lot of great questions coming in.
Yeah, so I mean, just in wrapping up, what the point we really want to drive home is that we encourage investors to look at measurement as a way of also managing impact. And by that, we really mean helping companies understand what upcoming decisions are there. Can you anchor data collection around business decision needs so you align it to, you align your incentives with the portfolio companies. And with that also really drawing some boundaries to make findings actionable. So don't collect, rather collect few but good things rather than too many that the company doesn't know what to do with. And then again, match data collection to the investment context, look at what budget, time, and expertise is available, and tailor your methods to where that portfolio company is and where you are as an investor.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for keeping such an eye on what is practical. I think that is exactly what a lot of the people on the line and the people also that answer to our survey were looking at. We've had a lot of questions that have been coming in, so I'm going to start reading out. Some of these are for you. So, Claudia, can you comment on using online surveys, pros and cons as compared to in-person and mobile surveys?
Yeah, I mean, online surveys, to some extent, they restrict your reach to people that are already comfortable engaging with an online environment. So that definitely means smartphones, or ideally a computer. And so if you have a portfolio company that serves rural farmers, probably an online survey may not be the right way to go. But however, if the customer base is already engaged online through the products or services, then an online survey may make sense. So what we really look at is trying to align the data collection method to the point of contact you already have with customers. And so if that main point of contact is somehow already enabled through an online product, it may make sense to tag on an online survey.
Thank you. Also, there's a question from Sam that says, could you comment on any research you might have done as of the cost of each of these tools? And have you done any focus groups or other assessments of quality, or the kind or quality of data investors values the most? How much would they pay, for example? How much would investors pay for more or better impact data? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in terms of, let's see, in terms of the cost of the tools, I mean, it really depends, I want to say, because it depends on whether the company has the in-house proficiency or whether it needs to be outsourced. In the handbook, we give a rough indication of cost and time needed. So one example of a fairly low-cost tool is the mobile survey. It can be turned around by many providers fairly quickly and at fairly low cost. Whereas, again, if you need to travel far distances to do an in-person survey, that will drive up costs. However, if the company is already deep into the field and has staff there, actually going and doing an in-person survey might not be so expensive. So I know that's maybe not that helpful, but I want to say it really depends. And there is some guidance in the handbook that we've provided to give some rough indications of the cost and time element. What was the second question? Oh yeah, the what data investors value the most. I mean, it's really back to what questions you're trying to ask. So there's no one size fits all. So it depends on what you want to learn and whether you are interested in getting the impact directly from your customers and getting a sense of perceptions of impact, versus are you looking to collect objective data points that which can't be self-reported. So it's really about the questions you're asking as an investor.
Great. We're going to try to do 2 more questions. One, so in the case of CDC's investments with fund managers, how does CDC Group work with GPs on data collection? Is CDC using these tools to collect the data, or are the GPs doing the data collection?
So it's really, we work with GPs to educate them, to guide them, and to inform them of the availability of these tools. And then we sometimes cost share, but often also expect the GPs to sort of be doing this, or even, you know, we would expect GPs to then engage with their portfolio companies to implement some of these tools. And I think the Sun Culture mobile survey that I talked about is one great example of really a data collection exercise being done at the company level, because it ultimately helps that company improve. And so it's the role, it's for us, the way we see it, it's our role to cascade down guidance and knowledge on how these tools can be useful at the portfolio company level, how many of these tools can drive operational business improvements and operational business decisions, while at the same time revealing insights about impact. So we would say there's really there's a role to play in being creative and being a guidance for both GPs, but also having them guide their portfolio companies and why these tools are valuable. And one note I do want to make on that is that sometimes if we as investors want companies to go above and beyond something that is directly operationally useful, well, in that case, if it's an independent impact evaluation, it might be something where then the investor will have to pay, or again, at least cost share, and not necessarily something that can be put entirely on the portfolio company as a cost.
Super, thank you, Claudia. And then the last question, Jane is asking if you can comment on the level of confidence that you need to have for making decisions about impact.
I'm not sure I get the question.
I guess the level of confidence on the data that you're getting, or Jane, if you want to unmute yourself and explain a little more, but is it about the level of confidence on the data that you're receiving?
Yeah, that's what I'm really getting at, the level of confidence about the data. You talked about the pros and cons of different data. So how confident do you need to be in the validity or reliability of your data in order to make a decision, a business decision?
Yeah, I mean, you do to some extent. I think that's where the sort of the general the general guidance on survey design, for instance, in general, is useful to make sure you check for the most most common errors, and that you do, if you outsource it, you engage with quality providers that are able to speak to that and address those questions. Things like checking, doing back checks on a sample of your customers, or other common ways to back check that have been quite well evidenced in that literature. Yeah, we still, of course, that still applies. So the norms and standards for what good design looks like, that still applies, and we as investors should of course play a role in checking that the sort of the basic standards are are in place.
Great. So we are at time. So I want to respect, we have 1 more minute and I want to respect everybody's time. Claudia, I want to thank you so much for this incredible presentation and sharing in such practical ways all the knowledge and experience of CDC Group with different data collection tools and methods. I want to point out also, we published yesterday the piece that we worked together with CDC, which is called Using Iris Plus for Data Collection. What you see here on the screen is just the cover page. This is now included in the guidance section of all your profiles. So where you have your core metric sets, your profiles, your guidance, this will be included there. Or also you can click on the link here as well to just go to there directly. Very quickly in terms of next steps, we have a lot more happening in Iris Plus. We'll be launching a public comment period very soon on some revisions, and also making available new themes such as education, sustainable water management, and sustainable quality, sustainable forestry. And then WASH, also somebody was asking, that's coming in the next couple of months as well. We are going to also continue to do webinars and workshops. Our next webinar is with CDC, with PCD on how to do impact due diligence with Iris Plus. And we look forward to continue to engage with you all through these coming months. And here, just wanted to share a quick screenshot of what we have available in Iris Plus, what's coming in the next few weeks, and what's being also coming on development later this month for those of you who have questions. I know I see a few more questions coming in, but we are at time. So what I will do is that you all have my email since I sent the original email for this. Should ask any questions via email that we didn't get to answer, and either Claudia or I will make sure to respond to those. So thank you again, everybody, and a special thanks to Claudia and CDC for working with us on this important topic. Thank you.